The morning sun streamed through the tall, narrow windows of the downtown courthouse, casting long, rigid lines across the polished wooden benches. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Car horns blaring, footsteps echoing on the sidewalks, and distant sirens weaving into the urban symphony. But inside Courtroom 4B, time seemed suspended. Every eye was fixed on the proceedings, as if the air itself had thickened, pressing against the walls. Spectators whispered nervously among themselves, the murmur of curiosity barely contained, while journalists leaned over their notepads, fingers poised to capture every word. The trial was one of the city's most talked-about cases, and the stakes could not have been higher. At the center of the room, the judge, a stern man with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for unwavering impartiality, sat behind the massive oak bench. His gavel gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the sound of it striking metal and wood like a heartbeat, steady yet ominous. The courtroom's hum quieted with each knock, each creak of the heavy doors opening, yet tension clung to the room like fog. No one dared break the fragile calm, not the attorneys, not the jury, not the defendant, and certainly not the observers, who had come hoping to witness justice in action. The young woman on trial, Emily Carter, sat with an almost eerie composure. She was barely 26, yet her eyes held a sharpness far beyond her years. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, and her posture perfectly upright. Hands folded calmly in her lap projected confidence, a rare sight in someone facing such serious charges. Despite the accusations hanging over her like a storm cloud, she gave the impression of someone entirely in control, someone who saw what others missed. Occasionally, her gaze flicked to the front of the courtroom, where the police dog, Max, waited quietly, tethered but alert. Max, a German shepherd of striking size and intelligence, was no ordinary dog. He had been trained for years in scent detection, tracking, and protection. His sleek coat gleamed, and his dark eyes followed every movement with calculated precision. His handler, Officer Daniel Reyes, a veteran with decades of experience, stood a few feet away, giving the dog subtle commands that barely moved his lips. Max shifted slightly on his paws, his ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Emily noticed the faint rise of his hackles, the slight quiver in his tail. Most people would have dismissed it as minor canine behavior, but Emily knew better. She had spent years volunteering at animal shelters, studying behavior, learning the smallest cues that could reveal what a dog was sensing. And today, that knowledge might just tip the scales. The defense lawyer, a tall man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, whispered hurriedly to Emily, his words barely audible. "Stay calm. Wait for your moment." Emily nodded imperceptibly, letting her hands rest lightly in her lap. She didn't need to speak yet. She only needed to observe. The prosecutor, by contrast, was a whirlwind of confidence. Mid-40s, sharply dressed, with a booming voice that carried authority, he paced slightly as he prepared to address the jury again. He was used to winning, used to assuming guilt was obvious when the evidence seemed strong. Fingerprints, video footage, witness testimony all aligned neatly against Emily. From his perspective, the case was already wrapped. She was just a small, quiet obstacle in his meticulously laid plan. But he had underestimated her. A murmur ran through the audience as the first witness of the day was called. A clerk, nervous and fidgeting, approached the stand. Emily's eyes, however, were not on the witness. They were on Max. She noticed the way his head tilted slightly, ears flicking at tiny sounds, the faint shuffle of papers, the soft creak of the clerk's shoes, the distant hum of a camera. He was aware of everything, every subtle change in the environment. And that awareness, Emily knew, could be the key to revealing the truth. The judge cleared his throat, the sound cutting sharply through the room. "Please, the court will come to order." The tapping of gavel against the bench echoed like a pulse through the room. The jurors shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, others crossing arms, all trying to read the undercurrents of tension that seemed to flow like electricity through the space. Emily felt their eyes upon her in fleeting glances, their curiosity sharp and probing. None of them, however, saw the calculation behind her calm exterior. As the witness began, the words seemed to float across the room, inconsequential to some, but loaded with implications for those paying close attention. Emily's mind raced, noting inconsistencies, small slips, and contradictions that the prosecution had failed to notice. Every time Max moved slightly, sniffed, or tilted his head, Emily interpreted the signal, mentally recording the reactions. Something about the briefcase on the table, the way the officer handled it, seemed to unsettle him subtly, a sign Emily had seen before in dogs trained like Max. Her pulse remained steady, though her mind worked at a furious pace. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the drama unfolding within the courtroom walls. Inside, the air grew thicker, heavier. The audience leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the trial. The defendant's quiet strength, the presence of a dog that was more than a mere prop. Emily's calm exterior was a mask over an active, calculating mind, ready to exploit the small but crucial details that everyone else overlooked. Minutes stretched like hours. The witness recounted their story, the prosecution nodding confidently at each truth confirmed. But Emily noted each subtle gesture of Max, each flicker of unease in the handler, and began forming a strategy in her mind. One precise moment, one carefully chosen word, could tilt the balance of this trial. She wasn't just waiting, she was preparing, timing her intervention with the patience of someone who understood the immense power of small actions. The defense lawyer shifted nervously beside her, sensing her readiness but unsure of what she planned. Emily's lips remained tight, her hands still. Her mind, however, worked with surgical precision. The courtroom, oblivious to the battle of perception taking place in her mind, continued on, unaware that the most critical moment of the trial was approaching. Hidden in the quiet observation of a young woman and a police dog. And then, Emily noticed it, a tiny, almost imperceptible sign from Max. His tail stiffened slightly, his nose twitched toward the briefcase. It was subtle, nearly undetectable to anyone else, but to her, it screamed volumes. Something was wrong. Something critical. The energy in the room shifted imperceptibly as she realized that the evidence everyone trusted might be misleading. Her lips curved slightly, not in a smile, but in recognition of the moment when she would act. The air in the courtroom grew taut, a silent anticipation threading through every observer. Emily's heartbeat remained steady, belying the storm of thought racing through her mind. Every step, every movement of Max, every glance at the jurors was noted. This was the perfect moment. The moment when two simple words could freeze an entire courtroom, redirect the course of a trial, and reveal truths that had been hidden in plain sight. Emily Carter's mind was a machine of observation and deduction. While the courtroom seemed to hum with the energy of anticipation and tension, her attention remained sharply focused on Max, the police dog, and the subtle discrepancies in the evidence displayed before the jury. She wasn't nervous. She never had been, even as accusations of a serious crime loomed over her. She had spent countless hours analyzing situations like this, not out of necessity, but out of habit, a quiet obsession with noticing the overlooked. In her mind, every twitch, every glance, every hesitation was a piece of a puzzle that others assumed irrelevant. Max, a German shepherd with a sleek coat and penetrating eyes, was unusual even among police dogs. His training had been extensive: narcotics detection, search and rescue, and tracking. He responded not just to commands, but to subtle environmental cues, scent, and tension. Emily had noticed that many dogs, no matter how trained, exhibited telltale signs when something was amiss. His tail flicked slightly. His ears twitched. His body stiffened for a moment before relaxing. For the untrained eye, these were insignificant movements, but to Emily, they screamed possibility that the so-called airtight case against her was riddled with unseen cracks. The courtroom remained oblivious to her observations. The judge, a man whose reputation for fairness was only matched by his sternness, scribbled notes on his legal pad, occasionally glancing up at the proceedings. The jury leaned forward, attentive but confused by what they couldn't articulate. Spectators murmured softly among themselves, the tension a living entity that wove through the courtroom benches. Journalists, pens poised, recorded the narrative of what was expected to be another high-profile conviction. All of them assumed Emily's quiet demeanor was a sign of resignation. They were wrong. Emily's attention was caught by the briefcase on the evidence table, a nondescript black case that everyone assumed contained the smoking gun proof of her guilt. The prosecution's confidence radiated in the room. The lead prosecutor paced slowly, emphasizing every detail of the case. Fingerprints found at the scene, video footage allegedly placing Emily at the crime site, and eyewitness testimony that seemed damning. To the casual observer, the pieces fit perfectly. But Emily noticed something subtle in Max's behavior. When the evidence had been brought out, the dog's nose had twitched. A faint growl had passed beneath his breath. He hadn't reacted to people in the courtroom, only to the case itself. That, Emily knew, was significant. She recalled everything she had learned about animal behavior from her years volunteering at shelters. Dogs reacted instinctively to smells and to tension. Max's reaction indicated an anomalous scent, a hint of something that didn't belong. Perhaps the evidence had been tampered with, or perhaps the dog recognized the presence of a substance someone had overlooked. Whatever it was, it created a narrow window of opportunity for Emily to act. She knew the timing had to be perfect. Too soon, and she would appear desperate. Too late, and the moment would pass unnoticed. The courtroom's energy shifted subtly as a new witness was called. A clerk, visibly nervous, approached the stand, fumbling slightly with her notes. Emily observed the interactions, the slight inconsistencies in the clerk's recounting of events. She noted how the handler, Officer Daniel Reyes, unconsciously shifted closer to the briefcase whenever it was mentioned. His eyes occasionally flicked toward Max, checking for reactions. Emily's mind raced. The dog was picking up cues that the humans were ignoring. She had to wait for the precise moment to speak, to direct attention without overtly interfering. Meanwhile, the spectators were oblivious to the tension building under the surface. A woman in the front row whispered to her companion, "I don't see how she could deny this. Everything points to her." Across the room, a young man recorded the trial on his phone, narrating in hushed tones for his social media audience. None of them realized that the trial's outcome hung on an invisible thread held taut by a quiet, observant young woman and a dog who understood more than anyone expected. Emily's defense lawyer leaned in, whispering words of reassurance. "Stay calm. Trust the plan." Emily simply nodded. She didn't need instructions. She had her strategy laid out in her mind. Watch, wait, and when the moment arrived, act decisively. The prosecutor's voice droned on, emphasizing the supposedly conclusive evidence. But Emily noticed the small discrepancies. The briefcase's unusual handling, the scent cues Max reacted to, and the inconsistencies in the witness statements. Each observation was another thread in a web she was slowly unraveling. Her thoughts were interrupted by a subtle movement from Max. The dog's head tilted slightly, ears forward and nose raised. Emily's pulse remained steady, but her mind sharpened. That small gesture confirmed her suspicions. The dog had detected something imperceptible to humans, something the court had not accounted for. Max's reaction was faint, almost imperceptible, but for Emily, it was a beacon, a signal that the case against her was far from solid. She silently counted her breaths, waiting for the precise moment when her intervention would have the maximum effect. Time seemed to stretch in the courtroom. The audience's collective patience strained against the slow unfolding of events. The jurors leaned forward, sensing tension, but not understanding its source. The witnesses spoke, the attorneys presented their points, and the judge observed silently. Yet all of it paled against the subtle battle unfolding between Emily and the dog. Each minute was a test of observation and restraint. Emily knew she could not speak prematurely. The power of her moment depended on timing, on drawing attention precisely when Max's behavior revealed the truth. Her mind flashed back to her childhood. She had always been drawn to animals, to noticing the details that others overlooked. She remembered the countless hours spent in shelters, observing behavior, learning the smallest signs of fear, curiosity, or recognition. That knowledge had become instinct. Today, it was her weapon. She could see patterns others couldn't. A briefcase's placement, Max's reactions, and the subtle cues that pointed to evidence manipulation. Emily's calm exterior belied a mind working at full capacity, ready to change the course of the trial with a single, precise action. The courtroom remained oblivious to the storm gathering in Emily's mind. Spectators whispered, jurors shifted, and the attorneys prepared their next moves. Max's ears twitched again, his gaze fixed on the briefcase. Emily recognized the exact moment. The dog's reaction had confirmed her instincts. The evidence that everyone assumed was decisive was, in fact, flawed. She had seen the signs, interpreted them correctly, and now the time had come to act. 2 words, spoken calmly and decisively, would redirect the attention of everyone in the room. Her lips curved slightly in anticipation. She felt no fear, only the focused intensity of someone fully prepared. The murmurs of the courtroom faded into the background. All that mattered was the connection between Emily and Max, and the invisible thread that linked them to the truth the court had yet to see. The moment was approaching, and when it arrived, it would freeze the entire courtroom in astonishment. Emily Carter, quiet and unassuming, was about to become the most important person in the room, not through argument, not through evidence, but through observation, courage, and 2 words that would change everything. The courtroom seemed to breathe as one entity, the anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Emily Carter's eyes never left Max, the police dog, as he remained tense yet poised, his ears twitching and tail flicking just enough to betray his alertness. The briefcase on the evidence table drew her attention constantly. It was unremarkable in appearance, a plain, black container, but today it held the potential to expose a truth that the courtroom had failed to notice. The prosecution had presented it as incontrovertible proof, the foundation of their case. Yet Emily's instincts, guided by Max's subtle reactions, told her otherwise. The witness on the stand shifted nervously, clutching a folder of notes. She was an ordinary clerk, not accustomed to the glare of public attention, yet she had become a central piece of this trial. Her testimony was meant to confirm the chain of events implicating Emily, but the more she spoke, the more Emily noted inconsistencies. A hesitation here, a glance there, a stumble over the word small errors unnoticed by the jury, but magnified in Emily's observant mind. Every subtle movement was a thread leading to a flaw, and every thread needed to be traced carefully. Max moved slightly, nose twitching, then froze completely as the clerk approached the briefcase. Emily's pulse remained steady, though the tension in the room grew almost unbearable. The jurors leaned forward instinctively, sensing the shift, yet not understanding its origin. The judge, pen poised, glanced up from his notes with a furrowed brow. aware of a subtle unease in the courtroom's atmosphere. Emily's hands remained folded in her lap, her face calm, but her mind raced. Every detail mattered. Timing mattered more. Emily recalled the training she had observed in police K-9 units during her years volunteering. Max's behavior was textbook. He had detected a scent or stimulus out of place, something that didn't belong. Dogs like him didn't make mistakes. They reacted instinctively, with precise cues that humans often overlooked. The tail flick, the paw lift, the brief pause before movement all indicated recognition, suspicion, or alert. Max's reaction to the briefcase was unmistakable to her trained eye. It was a subtle but powerful signal that the case's contents were flawed, or at the very least, incomplete. The prosecutor continued, oblivious to the silent battle unfolding between Emily and Max. His voice rose slightly, emphasizing the chain of custody, the fingerprints, the supposed airtight nature of the evidence. To the casual observer, his arguments were compelling, his authority undeniable. But Emily's mind parsed each word with surgical precision, comparing it against the reality of what she had observed. Max's behavior contradicted the prosecution's narrative. Something in that briefcase had altered the dog's instincts, a red flag, a crack in the facade of certainty. Emily's eyes swept the courtroom, noting how everyone else remained blind to the nuances. The jurors' faces were tense, curious, yet entirely unaware of the dog's subtle signals. Spectators whispered among themselves, misinterpreting the tension as general trial anxiety. The defense lawyer shifted in his chair, sensing that Emily's observation might soon prove pivotal, but unsure how. The judge's pen hovered mid-air as he absorbed the atmosphere, unaware that the turning point was imminent. All that remained was Emily's decisive action, the moment when observation became revelation. Then came the subtlest of signs. Max lifted a paw, freezing mid-step, eyes locked on the briefcase. The reaction was slight, almost imperceptible, but Emily recognized it immediately. His stance, the faint tilt of his head, and the tension in his muscles indicated the presence of something unusual, something that should not have been there. The clerk hesitated, then shifted her weight, unconsciously moving closer to the evidence. Max's nostrils flared, and a low, almost inaudible growl escaped. Emily knew this was it, the precise moment when she could act, when her words would carry the weight needed to change everything. She felt the energy in the room heighten. The prosecutor's voice wavered slightly as he observed Max's subtle movements. Emily's calm exterior concealed the storm of analysis within her mind. She considered the chain of events that had led to this moment, her observations of behavior, her knowledge of canine instincts, the inconsistencies in the evidence, and the subtle but undeniable reaction of the dog. Everything aligned perfectly, pointing to one unavoidable conclusion. The briefcase, supposedly containing irrefutable proof, held a secret the prosecution had ignored. The clerk continued her testimony, unaware that her presence and the briefcase were under scrutiny, not just by humans, but by Max's instinctive detection. She fumbled over a date, glanced nervously toward the prosecutor, and shifted the case slightly. Max's reaction intensified a growl, subtle but firm, and a paw raised mid-air as if to emphasize alert. Emily's heart remained calm, yet her mind raced through possibilities. Was there contamination? Misplacement? Tampering? Whatever it was, Max had identified it instantly. Emily glanced briefly at her lawyer. He nodded slightly, understanding her silent communication. The room's tension seemed to thrum in time with her heartbeat, although outwardly she remained composed. The jury, still unaware, absorbed only the surface-level proceedings. The spectators shifted in their seats, sensing something, though they could not articulate it. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered among themselves, and the judge's eyes flickered toward the subtle movement in Max. Nobody yet understood the significance of the moment, but Emily did. Her mind replayed every detail of her training and observations, layering the evidence of Max's reaction over the prosecution's narrative. The dog's body language indicated that something was hidden or altered, contradicting the supposedly perfect chain of custody. Emily realized that if she spoke now, directing attention to the dog and the briefcase, the trial could shift dramatically. The implications were immense. Evidence that had seemed conclusive could be invalidated, the jury's perception could be altered, and the prosecution's strategy could unravel entirely. Every muscle in Max's body radiated alertness, a living signal to Emily that the moment had arrived. The dog's focus was absolute, unwavering, and unmistakable. Emily drew in a slow, measured breath, feeling the weight of the courtroom's collective gaze without letting it disturb her calm. She knew exactly what to say, exactly how to say it. Timing was everything. Too early, and the courtroom would dismiss her. Too late, and the moment of revelation would pass. The clerk fumbled once more, brushing against the briefcase. Max's growl deepened ever so slightly. Emily's lips curved with faint determination. She had prepared for this moment, predicted it, and now it was upon her. Every observation, every subtle detail she had noticed, the flick of a paw, the twitch of an ear, the tension in Max's stance, coalesced into the single critical action she would take. Emily's mind raced with clarity. 2 words would suffice. They had to be precise, calm, and commanding. She needed the room to pause, to shift focus entirely, to see what she had observed, but no one else had. Her pulse was steady, her breath measured. Max remained frozen, his body a conduit of instinct and training, waiting for her cue. Emily raised her hand slightly, ready to point, to signal not just Max, but everyone in the courtroom to the critical truth lying in plain sight. In that charged, almost sacred moment, the courtroom became a suspended world. Time seemed to stretch. Every eye, even if unknowingly, was drawn to the subtle tension between Emily and Max. The jurors leaned forward, sensing an unspoken significance. The spectators whispered in hushed tones. The judge's pen hovered mid-air. And Emily Carter, quiet, unassuming, yet infinitely observant, prepared to transform the courtroom with the simplest of actions. 2 words that would freeze everyone in place, shatter assumptions, and change the course of the trial forever. Emily Carter's calm demeanor concealed the storm of thought racing in her mind. She had observed every twitch of Max's muscles, every subtle flick of his ears, and every minute change in posture that indicated something was amiss with the evidence. The briefcase, supposedly airtight in its chain of custody, had become the focal point of her attention, and Max's. For nearly an hour, she had waited, letting the trial unfold while carefully reading the cues that no one else in the courtroom noticed. Every second had been deliberate, every breath measured, every movement calculated. And now, the moment had arrived. The clerk continued her testimony, fumbling slightly with her notes as she approached the evidence table. Max's nose twitched violently, his body stiffened, and his gaze remained fixed on the case. Emily's pulse remained steady, but her mind sharpened to a razor's edge. She recognized the exact signs that indicated the dog had detected something critical, a scent out of place, a subtle alteration, a hidden truth in plain sight. Every instinct honed over years of volunteering and observation told her this was the moment to act. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, though nobody realized why. The jurors leaned forward, sensing the tension, but unable to articulate it. The judge paused, pen hovering over his notepad, the gavel temporarily forgotten. The spectators whispered quietly, curious and restless. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, the flash of bulbs adding to the electric atmosphere. And through it all, Emily remained a figure of calm determination, her eyes fixed on Max, who mirrored her focus with unwavering precision. Her mind replayed the possibilities one final time. If she acted too soon, the words would fall flat. If she acted too late, the moment would pass, leaving the evidence unchallenged and her defense weakened. Precision was everything. The subtle cues, the faint growl, the paw lift, the tilt of Max's head had all lined perfectly. Emily knew that these two words, delivered with confidence and clarity, would redirect every eye in the room and reveal the truth hidden within the briefcase. She rose slowly from her seat, every movement deliberate and calm. The courtroom noticed her shift, the slight rustle of her clothing drawing attention. All eyes followed her, including those of the prosecutor, who frowned at the unexpected action. Emily's hand lifted, pointing directly at Max, her finger steady and precise. A silence descended, thick and palpable, as the room realized something extraordinary was about to happen. Spectators leaned forward, some instinctively, sensing a pivotal moment. The judge's eyes narrowed, intrigued and cautious. And then Emily spoke. Two simple words, "Check that." The effect was immediate. The courtroom froze. Every eye turned to her in astonishment. The jurors gasped softly, leaning forward in disbelief. The prosecution's confident smile vanished, replaced by a flash of confusion and unease. Reporters stopped mid-note, pens hovering over paper as the weight of the words sank in. Even the judge's gavel hovered mid-air, the rhythmic knock of authority interrupted by a moment of pure tension. Silence reigned, broken only by the subtle sounds of Max's alert breathing. Max responded instantly. His body stiffened completely, ears pricked forward, and nose quivering as he approached the briefcase with purposeful precision. The handler, Officer Daniel Reyes, stepped forward cautiously, recognizing the dog's unusual behavior. Emily's two words had triggered a reaction that no human command could replicate. The dog's instincts, honed over years of training, now directed the attention of everyone in the courtroom toward the evidence that was supposedly beyond question. Emily's calm voice and precise gesture had done more than communicate. They had shifted the balance of the trial. The jurors' expressions changed from passive observation to active curiosity. They leaned forward, trying to decipher what the young woman had noticed that they hadn't. The prosecutor's confident demeanor wavered, his mind racing to anticipate the implications. He had assumed that Emily's quiet nature meant resignation, that her presence in the courtroom was passive. He had underestimated her entirely. As Max circled the briefcase, his behavior became more pronounced. He sniffed meticulously, pawing gently at one corner of the case, signaling recognition of something unusual inside. Emily's eyes sparkled with quiet triumph. She had anticipated this reaction perfectly. The dog's instincts had confirmed her suspicions. The evidence had been mishandled, altered, or otherwise compromised. The courtroom, which had assumed the briefcase held unassailable proof, now faced the possibility that its contents were flawed. The spectators' whispers grew louder, a ripple of astonishment running through the benches. Emily's two words had done more than draw attention. They had exposed a hidden layer of reality that no one else had perceived. The jurors exchanged incredulous glances, their confidence shaken. The judge, intrigued and cautious, leaned forward, eyes fixed on the briefcase and the dog's unusual behavior. Even the prosecution's team, seasoned and confident, struggled to maintain composure as they realized that the narrative they had carefully constructed might be unraveling. Emily's defense lawyer, seated beside her, allowed himself a subtle nod of approval. He had trusted her instincts, but seeing the effect on the courtroom was staggering. Emily had not just observed. She had acted decisively, using her knowledge and understanding of Max's cues to orchestrate a revelation. The courtroom was no longer a place of passive testimony. It had become a stage for truth to emerge, guided by a quiet, unassuming observer who had noticed what everyone else missed. Max's focus never wavered. He circled the briefcase, sniffing each corner, his body tense with concentration. The handler knelt slightly, whispering commands that seemed secondary to the dog's natural instincts. Emily watched intently, her calm demeanor masking the surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was the culmination of hours of observation, patience, and understanding. 2 words, spoken with clarity and confidence, had transformed the atmosphere, freezing the courtroom in a moment of collective astonishment. Every movement, every subtle reaction was magnified in importance. The jurors now viewed the briefcase with new eyes, questioning its integrity. The prosecution faltered, their arguments momentarily suspended as they tried to interpret the significance of Max's behavior. The spectators leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. Cameras flashed, capturing the precise moment when Emily Carter had shifted the entire trial with her words. It was a moment that would be remembered long after the case concluded. Emily's mind remained sharp. She knew that speaking the words was only the first step. The dog's behavior had set the stage, but the courtroom still needed direction. She maintained her composure, allowing Max to continue signaling while the jurors, the judge, and the prosecution processed the unexpected development. The room was thick with tension, curiosity, and disbelief. Emily had disrupted the trial's rhythm, exposing a hidden truth through observation, intuition, and an unspoken understanding of canine behavior. And then, for the first time, the prosecution spoke. The lead attorney cleared his throat, trying to regain authority, but his voice lacked conviction. He glanced at the briefcase, then at Max, then back at Emily. He realized that the chain of events he had assumed under control was now unpredictable. Emily's intervention had shifted the power in the courtroom. Evidence that had seemed decisive was now in question, and the narrative of the trial had been disrupted. The judge, sensing the extraordinary nature of the moment, called for a pause. "All rise," he commanded, though even his voice carried a note of disbelief. Spectators stood slowly, cameras still flashing, as murmurs filled the room. Emily remained seated, calm and composed, her gaze locked on Max. She had not shouted, not gestured wildly, not demanded attention. She had acted with precision, using observation and understanding to reveal a truth that had gone unnoticed. 2 words, simple, direct, had frozen an entire courtroom in awe. In that moment, Emily Carter became more than a defendant. She became the unlikely hero of her own story, the orchestrator of a revelation that no one else had anticipated. Max, the police dog, continued his focused inspection, each movement reinforcing the undeniable fact. The evidence everyone assumed unassailable might be compromised. And the courtroom, suspended in collective astonishment, had no choice but to recognize the quiet power of observation, timing, and courage. The courtroom remained frozen for a moment that stretched like eternity. Emily Carter's 2 words, "Check that," had rippled through the room, instantly altering the atmosphere. Spectators gasped, whispers surged, and jurors exchanged incredulous glances. The judge, pen hovering mid-air, blinked several times as he tried to process the sudden disruption to the orderly flow of the trial. Even the prosecution, so confident just moments before, seemed momentarily unmoored, their carefully constructed narrative challenged by something they could neither control nor fully understand, the instinctive reaction of a police dog. Max, the German shepherd, moved with precise attention, circling the briefcase like a silent sentinel. His nose quivered, nostrils flaring, as he detected a scent or anomaly invisible to human perception. His body was tense, alert, and commanding, yet he seemed guided by instinct alone. The handler, Officer Daniel Reyes, knelt cautiously, whispering commands that Max acknowledged with minimal reaction. The dog's behavior was unmistakable. There was something in that briefcase that shouldn't have been there. Something critical, something that called into question the entire prosecution's argument. The jury leaned forward, curiosity and confusion etched on every face. For the first time, they began to question the certainty of the evidence laid before them. Every subtle movement of Max, every careful sniff and paw placement, became a language they did not fully understand, yet instinctively recognized as significant. Emily's calm presence, her unwavering focus, lent weight to the spectacle. She had not shouted, not gestured wildly, yet the authority of her observation transformed the room. The courtroom had shifted from a stage of accusation to a scene of discovery, all centered on a young woman and a dog. Whispers spread among the spectators like wildfire. "Did you see that?" one woman asked, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the rest of the audience. "The dog. It's reacting to the evidence," another replied, astonishment creeping into her tone. Cameras flashed repeatedly, journalists scribbled furiously, and the social media live streams capturing the trial buzzed with excitement. The courtroom's energy was electric, the kind of tension that leaves everyone holding their breath in anticipation. Emily remained seated, hands folded, eyes steady, letting Max's actions speak for her. The prosecutor straightened, attempting to regain control. "Your Honor," he began, voice firm but lacking its previous authority. "The dog is trained, yes, but this is irrelevant to the testimony at hand. The evidence speaks for itself." Yet even as he spoke, he cast furtive glances toward Max, whose unwavering focus on the briefcase undermined the confident tone of the argument. The jurors, sensing the unspoken significance, remained captivated. Their attention had shifted from words to behavior, from assumption to observation. Emily's defense lawyer took advantage of the moment, standing slowly to address the court. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, "the behavior of the canine is highly relevant. It indicates that the evidence may have been compromised or mishandled. We request a closer examination." His words carried authority now, amplified by the undeniable signals Max provided. A judge's eyes flickered from Emily to Max to the briefcase, assessing the situation with the cautious curiosity of someone witnessing something extraordinary. The judge nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of the unfolding events. "Very well," he said, voice calm but deliberate. "Let the evidence be examined immediately." The clerk, still clutching her folder, looked bewildered, unsure whether she had caused the sudden upheaval or merely been a witness to it. Max remained rigid, his body a living indicator of the hidden truth within the case. Emily's two words had ignited a chain reaction. The courtroom was no longer a passive observer of testimony, but an active participant in the unraveling of assumptions. The jurors exchanged whispers, their curiosity now tempered with a sense of urgency. The subtle shifts in Max's posture, the twitch of his ears, the tension in his body, each had been invisible to the untrained eye, but now spoke volumes. Emily understood the power of these silent signals. She had waited, analyzed, and acted with precision, orchestrating a moment that could alter the trial's outcome. The courtroom's collective attention was fixed on a single point, the briefcase and the dog whose instincts no one else could read. Officer Reyes knelt closer to Max, observing his movements carefully. The handler's experience told him this was unusual, unprecedented even in his years of working with trained canine South. The dog's reaction was not a mere reflex. It was focused, deliberate, and indicative of a real discrepancy in the evidence. Emily watched the interaction quietly, knowing that every moment Max spent signaling was reinforcing her case. The dog had identified something overlooked, and the courtroom's entire dynamic had shifted around it. The prosecution, sensing the moment slipping away, scrambled to reassert control. They requested clarification, questioning the dog's relevance and attempting to maintain the narrative of a watertight case. But the jurors were already thinking differently. Their attention had moved from the dry recitation of facts to the tangible evidence of instinct and behavior. Max's reactions were undeniable, observable, and authoritative. Emily's quiet confidence gave weight to their observations, creating a compelling argument without a single word from her beyond the initial two. Spectators whispered among themselves, some gasping audibly as Max pawed at the briefcase, circling it like a sentinel guarding a secret. Emily's lips remained neutral, but her eyes gleamed with anticipation. She knew that the subtle chain of cues she had been observing for hours had reached their apex. Every twitch of the dog, every hesitant step around the briefcase, confirmed what her mind had already deduced. The evidence was flawed. The room's energy vibrated with tension, a mixture of astonishment, curiosity, and unease. The jurors' expressions evolved from skepticism to intrigue. Some leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes wide with realization. The judge, cautious but perceptive, indicated that the examination of evidence should proceed. The courtroom transformed into a space of inquiry rather than accusation. Emily's strategic observation had rewritten the narrative. She had converted a moment of quiet attention into an overwhelming display of truth, facilitated by Max's trained instincts. Every person present was now a witness to the extraordinary power of observation, timing, and intuition. Reporter notes and camera flashes documented the unprecedented events. The courtroom had witnessed something rare, the quiet, decisive action of an observant defendant, complemented by a police dog's instinctive detection, capable of redirecting the perception of truth. The energy was palpable. Whispers echoed against the wooden walls. The jurors' minds raced, and even the seasoned prosecution team struggled to maintain composure. Emily had shifted the balance, demonstrating that insight and courage could triumph over assumption and arrogance. As Max focused intently on the briefcase, the clerk approached hesitantly. The dog's reaction was precise, signaling that something in the evidence demanded scrutiny. Emily's eyes followed every motion, fully aware that her calculated patience had reached its moment of consequence. Every observer in the courtroom now understood subconsciously or consciously that the narrative of the trial was no longer entirely under the prosecution's control. The dog's behavior, reinforced by Emily's intervention, had introduced doubt into what had seemed a flawless case. The jurors whispered amongst themselves, exchanging looks of astonishment. Even the judge, maintaining a neutral tone outwardly, allowed a small pause to consider the implications. The room's energy had shifted from confident expectation to tense inquiry. Emily remained poised, her calm demeanor now commanding respect and attention. Her ability to interpret Max's subtle signals had elevated her from passive defendant to active orchestrator of truth. As Officer Reyes began a cautious inspection of the briefcase, Max remained alert, clearly directing attention toward specific points. Emily watched silently, understanding that the dog's instinct was now guiding the courtroom's focus. The implications were enormous. The prosecution's narrative, once confidently accepted, was now in question. The jurors' perceptions were being challenged by instinctive observation rather than argument alone. Emily's two words had ignited a chain reaction, freezing the courtroom in disbelief and forcing an examination that could redefine the trial. The courtroom had descended into a tense, electric silence. Every eye followed the dog, Max, as he circled the briefcase with precise, calculated movements. His ears were pricked, nostrils flaring, and tail stiffened in the unmistakable stance of detection. Emily Carter remained perfectly composed, though her mind raced, analyzing every twitch, every subtle shift of the dog's posture. Max was signaling clearly. Something was hidden, something the court had assumed unquestionable. Emily's instincts told her it was the critical moment. The judge, aware of the extraordinary unfolding, leaned forward slightly. "Officer Reyes," he said, his voice calm but measured, Please explain the dog's behavior for the court. The officer straightened, clearing his throat. Your Honor, Max is trained to detect substances, irregularities, and any anomaly in evidence handling. His behavior now indicates that this particular piece of evidence may have been compromised. It's highly unusual for a dog to react so consistently without cause. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emily's 2 words had triggered more than attention. They had activated a chain reaction that exposed the evidence's hidden vulnerabilities. The jury, who had been quietly absorbing the events, leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. They could feel that the trial's narrative, once rigid and unquestionable, was shifting in real time. Spectators whispered among themselves, some gasping audibly. Cameras flashed repeatedly, documenting the moment when instinct, observation, and courage converged. Max's behavior became increasingly focused. He stopped directly in front of one corner of the briefcase, paw raised, nose quivering with heightened attention. Officer Reyes bent slightly, whispering a command under his breath, but the dog's instincts overrode even trained guidance. The handler's eyes widened as he realized the significance. Max was pointing to a specific section, an area where human observation had failed to detect the anomaly. Emily recognized the signals immediately. She had anticipated this, studied it, and now watched as her interpretation of Max's behavior unfolded perfectly before the court. The prosecutor's confidence began to crack. He leaned forward, trying to assert control over the narrative. Your Honor, I maintain that the evidence is valid. The dog's reaction does not negate the chain of custody or the documentation provided. Yet his voice wavered, betraying the subtle panic rising in the room. Every subtle twitch of Max's ears, every careful sniff, reinforced doubt in the minds of the jurors. The dog's behavior, paired with Emily's intervention, was creating an undeniable ripple effect. Emily's defense lawyer rose carefully, seizing the opportunity. Your Honor, he said, voice steady and firm, the canine's reaction demonstrates potential evidence mishandling. We request a forensic review immediately. The judge considered the statement, eyes flicking between Emily, Max, and the briefcase. The dog's unwavering focus lent credibility to the motion. The room held its collective breath, sensing the magnitude of the unfolding moment. Emily's calculated patience had transformed a quiet observation into a courtroom revelation. Max suddenly emitted a low, deliberate growl, signaling heightened detection. Officer Reyes approached cautiously, kneeling beside the briefcase, examining the corner that Max had indicated. The jurors leaned forward, whispering softly to one another, beginning to connect the dots. Spectators were captivated. The camera flashes illuminated the awe and tension etched into the faces of everyone present. The briefcase, once assumed to be indisputable proof, was now at the center of doubt, a tangible symbol of a flaw overlooked by human perception, but revealed through instinct. Emily's eyes followed Max's every motion. Her mind raced through the implications. The dog's behavior suggested tempering subtle alterations in scent, movement, or placement that had gone unnoticed. The evidence's credibility was now in question. The courtroom, which had once assumed the case's trajectory was fixed, was witnessing a dramatic shift. Every detail Emily had observed, the flick of an ear, the slight paw lift, the tense tail had contributed to a growing awareness that something critical had been overlooked. The prosecutor attempted to regain control, pacing slightly as he addressed the court. This is highly irregular, Your Honor. The dog's behavior is not direct evidence. The chain of custody remains intact, and the items have been documented. Yet even as he spoke, the room's attention remained fixed on Max and the briefcase. The jury, perceptive to subtleties they could not fully articulate, leaned forward with renewed interest. Emily's silent guidance had redirected the court's focus, transforming instinct into authority. Officer Reyes, now closer to the briefcase, opened it carefully, revealing the contents to the courtroom. The jurors' eyes widened as discrepancies became evident. Documents appeared altered. A small item had been shifted from its original position, and subtle inconsistencies contradicted previous testimony. Max stood still, signaling continued alertness, as if emphasizing the gravity of the oversight. The courtroom murmurs grew louder. Whispers escalated to audible gasps as the implications became clear. The evidence that had seemed so decisive was now visibly flawed. Emily's lips curved slightly, not in triumph, but in quiet satisfaction. Her meticulous observation had paid off. The dog had confirmed what she had suspected. The evidence was compromised. The courtroom, once a place of rigid control, had become a theater of revelation. Every person present, jurors, spectators, attorneys, and the judge, witnessed the undeniable truth. Instincts, observation, and courage had exposed what human assumptions had missed. The judge's voice cut through the murmurs. "Let the record reflect that the evidence is under review," he said, maintaining formality while acknowledging the extraordinary moment. Officer Reyes remained beside Max, allowing the dog's behavior to guide further inspection. The jurors exchanged glances, now fully aware that the case they had been assessing with certainty was no longer straightforward. Emily had transformed a static situation into a dynamic, unfolding investigation. The courtroom continued to buzz with subdued energy. Emily's presence, her calm demeanor, and her precise direction of attention had elevated her role from defendant to orchestrator of truth. The dog's instinctive detection was undeniable. The jury's perception shifted from accepting the prosecution's narrative to questioning it, analyzing inconsistencies, and considering the implications of the newly revealed evidence. Spectators whispered fervently, capturing a moment that felt historic, surreal, and extraordinary all at once. Emily observed Max, whose behavior had now become almost ceremonial in its significance. He had led the court to the critical revelation, highlighting flaws that human scrutiny alone had failed to detect. Her quiet confidence and unwavering attention had orchestrated the perfect intersection of instinct, observation, and timing. Every subtle movement, paw lift, ear tilt, tail tension, had contributed to the courtroom's understanding of the compromised evidence. The prosecution, now visibly unsettled, attempted to regroup. Their narrative of an airtight case had fractured under the weight of revelation. Questions arose about chain of custody, document integrity, and procedural accuracy. The jurors, once passive recipients of evidence, were now active interpreters, guided not only by testimony, but by the subtle, undeniable signals of a trained police dog. Emily's intervention had transformed instinct into actionable insight, leaving the courtroom grappling with a new reality. As Officer Reyes continued his careful examination, Max remained vigilant, eyes fixed on the briefcase, alert to every shift. Emily felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. Her observation had guided the revelation. The courtroom, collectively stunned, absorbed the extraordinary display of instinct, precision, and courage. Emily Carter, previously underestimated, had turned the trial on its head with knowledge, timing, and a subtle but decisive partnership with Max. By the end of the examination, the discrepancies were undeniable. Items in the briefcase had been tampered with, evidence had been mishandled, and the prosecution's narrative was fundamentally challenged. Jurors whispered in astonishment, spectators gasped, and reporters documented the extraordinary event. Emily had orchestrated a revelation that no human could have predicted alone. Max's instinctive detection had illuminated hidden flaws, forever altering the courtroom's perception of the case. In that charged, silent moment, Emily realized the impact of her intervention. 2 words, delivered with precision, had catalyzed a sequence of events that had exposed the truth. Max had validated her observations, transforming intuition into undeniable evidence. The courtroom's collective understanding had shifted irreversibly. The young woman, quiet, composed, and observant, had become the pivot around which the trial now turned. The courtroom buzzed with a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and mounting tension. Every eye followed Max, the German shepherd, as he continued to signal the compromised briefcase with unwavering focus. Emily Carter remained seated, calm and composed, her gaze locked on the dog, her mind racing through the implications. For hours, she had quietly observed, patiently waited, and deciphered the smallest cues that no one else had noticed. Now, her patience and precision were paying off in ways she had only hoped for. Officer Daniel Reyes carefully followed Max's behavior, kneeling beside the briefcase and noting every movement. Max pawed at a specific corner, nostrils flaring, then circled once more, returning to the same spot. It was undeniable. The dog had detected a discrepancy, something the prosecution's team had overlooked entirely. Emily's quiet confidence radiated through her posture, her steady eyes reflecting the clarity of her analysis. She had anticipated this, and now the courtroom was witnessing the culmination of her insight. The judge, maintaining his calm composure, leaned forward slightly. "The court will allow full inspection of the evidence," he said, voice firm but measured. "Any discrepancies found must be recorded immediately." The jurors shifted in their seats, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and alert curiosity. Spectators whispered among themselves, captivated by the drama unfolding in real time. Cameras flashed continuously, capturing the historic moment when instinct, observation, and courage converged in a courtroom. The prosecution scrambled, trying to regain control. "Your Honor, I must insist that the chain of custody has been maintained at all times," the lead attorney argued, though the certainty in his voice had waned. He cast frequent glances at Max, whose intense focus on the briefcase undermined the credibility of the argument. Every subtle twitch, every sniff, every paw placement served as a silent counterpoint to the prosecution's narrative. Emily's 2 words, "Check that," had ignited a chain reaction that could not be ignored. Emily's defense lawyer rose cautiously, taking advantage of the shifting momentum. "Your Honor, the dog's behavior indicates tampering or mishandling of evidence. We request that the court grant a thorough examination and consider the integrity of the case compromised until verified." His voice carried authority, amplified by the courtroom's newfound awareness of Max's extraordinary detection. The jurors, now fully attentive, began to reconsider their assumptions about the evidence and the case itself. Max returned to the briefcase, sniffing each corner methodically. His actions were deliberate, precise, and unmistakable. The subtle growl he emitted drew the attention of the entire courtroom. Emily watched closely, recognizing the signs of discovery. Max had pinpointed the exact location of irregularities within the briefcase. The jurors, spectators, and even the judge were now aware that something critical had been revealed. The air in the courtroom vibrated with tension, anticipation, and the realization that the trial's trajectory had shifted irreversibly. The clerk, still holding her notes, approached hesitantly. Max's focus on a small, specific compartment within the briefcase intensified. The jurors leaned forward, whispering softly as the implications became clearer. The prosecution's confidence faltered further, their narrative unraveling in real time. Emily's mind raced, analyzing how the courtroom's perception had shifted, how each observer was now processing the revelation in their own way. Her calculated intervention had transformed instinct and observation into undeniable evidence. Officer Reyes carefully opened the highlighted compartment under Max's guidance. Inside, they found items that contradicted previous testimonies, documents altered subtly, a small object misplaced, and clear signs that the evidence had been tampered with. The jurors gasped audibly, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock. Spectators whispered, some covering their mouths in disbelief. Cameras captured every reaction, documenting the extraordinary moment when a young woman and a dog had exposed a flaw in what was supposed to be an airtight case. Emily's lips curved slightly, not in triumph, but in quiet satisfaction. Her patience, her observation skills, and her understanding of Max's behavior had orchestrated a revelation that no argument or lawyer could have forced. The courtroom's energy had shifted completely. What had been a narrative of certainty was now a tableau of doubt, scrutiny, and reevaluation. The jurors were forced to consider the possibility that the prosecution's evidence could not be trusted. The prosecution attempted to regain composure, but every move they made was undermined by the reality in front of them. The evidence they had presented as definitive proof was now visibly compromised. Every subtle movement by Max reinforced the growing doubts. The jurors, witnesses, and spectators were all processing the implications simultaneously. Emily had transformed a quiet observation into a turning point that would redefine the trial entirely. The judge, recognizing the gravity of the moment, addressed the courtroom. The evidence will be thoroughly reviewed. The chain of custody is in question, and all relevant items must be examined under scrutiny. Let the record reflect that the integrity of the evidence is under serious consideration. His words carried the weight of authority. Yet even he could not hide the underlying astonishment at the unprecedented developments. Max's actions had shifted the balance of power in the courtroom. The jury began to whisper among themselves, their curiosity and analytical thinking now fully engaged. Every subtle cue from Max, the tilt of his head, the lift of a paw, the intense sniffing, had become a new language they were interpreting. Emily's intervention, her 2 words and calm demeanor, had transformed passive observation into active investigation. The courtroom was no longer just a space for argument. It had become a stage for revelation, guided by instinct, precision, and courage. Spectators leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding events. Cameras continued to flash. Journalists scribbled notes furiously, and social media streams buzzed with excitement. The courtroom had become a theater of truth-seeking, where every movement, every sound, and every gesture carried significance. Emily's calculated action had elevated her from defendant to orchestrator of a revelation, demonstrating the profound impact of observation, timing, and intuition. Officer Reyes allowed Max to continue inspecting the briefcase. The dog's actions were deliberate and unwavering, confirming the existence of tampering. Emily's mind raced, considering the implications for the trial, for the prosecution's narrative, and for her own defense. She remained calm, understanding that the next steps were crucial. The revelation had occurred, but the courtroom's response would determine how far the consequences would ripple. The prosecution, now visibly shaken, attempted to interject. "Your Honor, the evidence can be clarified. There must be a reasonable explanation for these discrepancies," the lead attorney argued, though his voice lacked conviction. The jurors, now fully engaged in evaluating the evidence for themselves, were not swayed. Max's behavior, reinforced by Emily's calculated guidance, had introduced a new element of truth that could not be ignored. Emily's quiet observation had created a turning point that no one had anticipated. The courtroom, once a place of passive testimony and assumed certainty, had transformed into an arena of scrutiny and revelation. Every person present, jurors, spectators, attorneys, and the judge, was forced to reconsider their assumptions. Max had become the conduit through which truth emerged, and Emily had been the orchestrator, guiding attention and focus with precision and courage. By the time Officer Reyes completed his careful inspection, the discrepancies were undeniable. The evidence had been mishandled, altered, or tampered with, and the prosecution's case was no longer absolute. The jurors whispered among themselves, astonished at the sudden shift in narrative. Spectators gasped, reporters documented every detail, and the courtroom itself seemed to vibrate with the weight of revelation. Emily had transformed a static trial into a dynamic investigation, guided by observation, timing, and the extraordinary instincts of a dog. As the judge called for a recess to allow for the review of evidence, Emily felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. Her patience, knowledge, and keen observation had created a turning point in the trial. The courtroom's energy had shifted irrevocably. What had been a presumed certainty was now under scrutiny. Emily Carter, quiet, composed, and observant, had altered the course of the trial through insight, courage, and a partnership with an extraordinary dog. The courtroom had shifted into a state of controlled chaos, yet every action, every glance, and every breath seemed to hum with anticipation. Emily Carter remained calm, seated in her place, hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes occasionally flicking to Max, the German shepherd whose instincts had rewritten the trial. The evidence had been examined, discrepancies documented, and the chain of custody called into question. What had once seemed an airtight case against Emily had been transformed into a web of doubt, uncertainty, and revelation, all because of a young woman who had observed what no one else had. The jurors whispered among themselves as the court clerk finalized notes on the newly reviewed evidence. The altered documents, misplaced items, and subtle signs of tampering were now part of the official record. Emily's defense lawyer stood quietly beside her, exuding a sense of calm confidence that mirrored hers. They both knew that the trial had fundamentally changed. The prosecution, visibly shaken, reviewed their notes and consulted in hushed tones, struggling to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond their grasp. The judge, maintaining a composed exterior, cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, voice steady but resonating with authority. "You have witnessed the examination of critical evidence and the subsequent discovery of discrepancies. It is now your responsibility to deliberate based on the facts and the integrity of the evidence presented. You may retire to the jury room." The gavel struck softly, a subtle punctuation to the dramatic events that had unfolded. The jurors rose, exchanging determined glances, and filed out with measured steps, leaving the spectators and court officials in a reflective hush. Emily's eyes followed the jurors as they departed, her expression calm, yet internally alert. Max sat obediently by her side, ears twitching occasionally, maintaining vigilance even in this moment of temporary pause. The courtroom's energy was thick with anticipation, as if everyone present knew that the final judgment was now in motion. Emily's two words, "Check that," had frozen the courtroom, redirected attention, and exposed flaws. But the verdict would ultimately depend on how the jurors interpreted the revelations Max had guided them to discover. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy had already begun. Reporters crowded the halls, microphones thrust toward anyone who could provide insight, while cameras recorded every angle of the building. Yet inside, Emily remained insulated from the chaos. Her mind was focused on the jury, on the process, and on the subtle sense of satisfaction that came from knowing she had acted with precision, patience, and courage. The trial had changed irrevocably, and she had been the catalyst. The jurors returned after hours of deliberation, their expressions serious and thoughtful. Each step toward the courtroom felt monumental, the weight of responsibility etched into every face. Emily's defense lawyer whispered a few encouraging words, but she hardly needed them. She had been prepared for this moment since she had observed Max's initial reaction. The courtroom fell silent as the jurors filed in, returning to their seats with a collective gravity that made every heartbeat in the room feel amplified. The four-person stood, holding the verdict envelope carefully. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady but tinged with the weight of responsibility, "we have reached a unanimous decision. The courtroom collectively inhaled, the anticipation palpable. Emily's lips remained neutral, her composure intact, though inside, a quiet tension coiled in her chest. Max shifted slightly, tail brushing the floor, as if he understood the significance of the moment. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on the foreperson, awaiting the announcement that would resolve the trial and validate the revelation that had shaken the very foundation of the case. The foreperson continued, "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty." A wave of astonishment swept through the courtroom. Spectators gasped audibly, some covering their mouths in disbelief. The defense team exchanged quiet smiles of relief, and Emily allowed herself the briefest exhale of satisfaction. The prosecutor's face paled, his shoulders slumping slightly as the weight of the verdict sank in. The jurors, though maintaining formal composure, allowed a subtle sense of validation and accomplishment to pass among them. They had recognized the evidence for what it truly was, thanks in part to the extraordinary demonstration of instinct, observation, and insight. Emily remained seated, her calm demeanor unchanged outwardly, yet internally, a quiet sense of triumph settled over her. Max remained by her side, faithful and alert, his presence a steady reminder of the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. She had acted not through confrontation or argument alone, but through observation, patience, and trust in instincts that transcended human perception. Her 2 words, simple, unassuming, yet precise, had frozen the courtroom, redirected attention, and led to a revelation that saved her from an unjust outcome. The judge addressed the courtroom, his voice measured and solemn. "The court acknowledges the jury's verdict. Let the record reflect that the defendant has been acquitted of all charges. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck decisively this time, echoing through the room, a tangible punctuation to the months of tension, investigation, and revelation that had defined the trial. Emily rose slowly, allowing herself a brief, controlled smile. She had faced what seemed insurmountable, relied on her insight, and ultimately prevailed. As the spectators filed out, many approached cautiously, some offering congratulations, others inquiring curiously about Max's role in the extraordinary outcome. Journalists swarmed around the defense team, eager to capture the story of the quiet, observant woman who had changed the course of justice with a single phrase and a keen understanding of a dog's instincts. Emily remained composed, answering questions briefly, always ensuring that Max was recognized for his pivotal role. He had not merely been a pet or an accessory. He had been a critical participant in the revelation of truth. Outside the courthouse, the media coverage exploded. Headlines praised the unexpected heroes: Emily Carter, the observant young woman, and Max, the police dog, whose instincts had altered the trial. Social media buzzed with admiration, curiosity, and incredulity. Experts in law, animal behavior, and criminal investigation analyzed the case, dissecting the precise moments when observation and instinct converged to expose a hidden truth. Emily's 2 words became symbolic, a simple phrase that triggered profound consequences. In the days that followed, Emily returned to her quiet life, though she was forever changed. She had learned the power of patience, observation, and trust in instincts that others might overlook. Max remained by her side, a constant reminder of the partnership that had altered the course of her life. The trial, which had once seemed an overwhelming challenge, had become a testament to the subtle yet profound impact of insight, courage, and timing. Emily often reflected on the trial and Max's behavior. She understood that her success had not come from confrontation or aggression, but from careful observation and deliberate action. The courtroom had frozen because of her awareness, her ability to read subtle cues, and her understanding of instincts beyond human comprehension. The verdict, while formally recorded, was only the culmination of an intricate process she had quietly orchestrated. The story of Emily Carter and Max spread beyond the courthouse, inspiring discussions about the importance of observation, patience, and unconventional insight in both law and life. People marveled at how two words uttered calmly, with purpose, could catalyze a chain of events that exposed hidden truths. The unlikely partnership between a young woman and a dog became emblematic of courage, subtlety, and the power of noticing what others ignore. In the end, Emily Carter walked away from the courthouse, not merely as a woman acquitted of charges, but as a symbol of quiet intelligence and strategic awareness. Max trotted faithfully beside her, ears pricked, tail relaxed yet alert. Together, they had proven that observation, intuition, and courage could overcome even the most formidable challenges. The trial was over, but the story of their partnership would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom, a lasting testament to the power of insight, timing, and the unspoken bond between human and animal. And as Emily stepped into the sunlight outside, she glanced down at Max and whispered softly, "We did it." The dog's ears twitched, and he wagged his tail gently, as if acknowledging their shared victory. It was a quiet, unassuming celebration, an ending befitting the subtle, intelligent, and extraordinary journey that had begun with two simple words.